people in mind. He said, you don't, you basically, they receive the merit as though you had prayed for them. So the impact on them is the same as the impact would be if you had prayed for those individuals. So there is an impact. There is an impact even on the earth. So that, but we'll talk a little bit more about how that works when we get into the mechanics of the practice, because there's some, we have to open up to use an automobile metaphor, you have to open up the hood and look inside. So, okay. All right. So I'll begin with a couple of general remarks about Tonglen, and then we're actually going to learn the practice of Tonglen fairly quickly here, and then we'll start the process of deepening our understanding of it. We'll have a basis in how to do it, then we'll learn some ways to deepen it, and then we'll learn how to make it a daily practice. So this is basically the area we're going to cover today. I will have a short break at the top of the hour, and so folks can get up and move around, use the restroom, and so on. And this will also be for the folks on Zoom. It'll be about 5 to 10 minute break. So that'll give everybody a little refresh in their brain. So the reason I wanted to do this class was because Tonglen has been a great practice for me. It's in many ways, it changed my life. And so because Tonglen meant a lot to me, and because Tonglen changed my life, I really want to share it with other people so that they can have some of the advantages that I had from doing this practice. I literally, it changed my life. And, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I should talk about the why. Why do we do any kind of meditation practice, whether it's meditation on breath awareness or meditation on mantra or meditation on compassion, which is what Tonglen is. It's a meditation on love and compassion. So why do we do any kind of meditation? The reason is pretty simple. As human beings, we need it. We actually need the practice of meditation. The reason that we need meditation is because right now our minds are so busy all the time. It's like there's no rest for us. Our minds are incredibly busy. Even people who live in very simple environments close to the land have busy minds, because it takes a lot to survive. You have to find food, you have to have shelter, you have to be able to have companionship, you have to have safety, you have to have security. There's a lot that you need in order to live in this world. It takes a lot of effort to live in this world. This is part of the reason that people congregate together in community, because it's easier if we all live together and help each other. And so our busy, busy minds are always thinking about survival. They're always thinking about comfort. They're always thinking about safety. And so our minds are very busy. So the practice of meditation helps us in that it gives us a moment to gear back and gear down and take a break from the constant activity in the mind. And so the structure of all meditation practices is very similar, whether it's an app on your phone that uses a guided imagery, or whether it is just the simple practice of sitting and becoming aware of the coming and going of your breath. The structure is very similar in that all forms of meditation involve placing your attention on something. Placing your attention on something, leaving it there for as long as it naturally lasts, and then when the attention wanders from the subject of the meditation, you notice the wandering and you gently return your attention to the object. This is really the structure of all forms of meditation. It's all about training our attention to be in one place, doing one thing. And this is because this is relief for the busy mind, because we're so busy again trying to survive. We're so busy trying to survive, we don't really have any time to regroup except when we sleep. And for many people, even when they sleep, their minds are busy because some of the leftover stress from having all of those thoughts during the day carry over into our sleep at night. And some people have unusual dreams that wake them up, and they feel like when they wake up in the morning, they're not really rested because their minds have been busy all night. So the practice of meditation and the structure of meditation is really important because it allows us to take our attention away from survival for just a few minutes and just be with ourselves, be with silence, be with a restorative frame of mind. And so the discipline and technique of meditation allows us to do this. The structure of meditation allows us to step back and let our mind rest. Even if we are busy attempting to follow the technique, it's a very small area of interest for our minds to pay attention to the technique. It's a very small area of interest. We don't have to fight against everything that's crowding, looking for our attention. What about this? What about that? You have to do this. You have to do that. All you got to do when you're sitting is stay with your object. It's actually, now you can kind of see when we talk about the structure of it, you can kind of see how the structure of meditation, actually, that's the key piece. It's what allows us to gear back and relax. So that's what meditation is all about. And the techniques of meditation, some of the techniques of meditation have special side benefits. Okay, calm abiding, or shamatha, that's spelled S as in Sam, H-A, M as in Mary, A, T as in Tom, A. Shamatha means calm abiding. That's the basic breath awareness meditation that we do here at KTC Columbus and at Buddhist centers around the world. This basic shamatha has extra added benefits. They're looking at the health benefits in that it helps to lower blood pressure, it helps to lower heart rate. Just this basic practice has some side effects that are really beneficial. But there is more that we can do with meditation. Compassion and love meditation are also being studied by scientists right now. And they find that when people meditate on the subject of love or meditate on the subject of compassion, that they themselves become more loving and more compassionate. And this in turn also helps their blood pressure, their heart rate, but also their internal feelings of satisfaction and well-being. In May, those of you who are familiar with the Center of Science and Industry, here just a few blocks down the street from us, one of the best science museums in the United States is right a few blocks down here. Every May, they have something called Science Festival. And this year, for I think the third year, we're going to be hosting a brain scientist here at KTC from the University of West Virginia. And she's going to give a series of 3 lectures here at KTC for Science Festival. She's going to talk about mindfulness on day 1. Day 2, she's going to talk about Tonglen and altruism. And then on day 3, she's going to talk about something called the science of awe, AWE, which tells us a little bit about how awe-inspiring images and practices can actually help us to disengage from negative patterns of thought and also aggression. It's very interesting, the studies that are being done about this now. It's just really fascinating. So what's happening now is that science is noticing that meditation has all these added extra benefits. Shamatha lowers the blood pressure and the heart rate, and the practice of love and compassion meditation increases inner feelings of well-being. And then the mantra practices key into what is called the power of the sacred or the power of awe, which is about disengaging from selfishness, which if you go back and read Buddhist text, the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, he said suffering's part of life. That's the first noble truth. Second noble truth is that suffering has a cause. Third is that because suffering has a cause, it has a solution. And the fourth of the noble truths is that there is a path that leads to the end of suffering. The first one we kind of got. Suffering, yeah, we have that in our life. We have all kinds of suffering, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, we have all kinds of suffering. But the cause of suffering is a little more mysterious to us. We tend to think that the cause of suffering is something external, when really the Buddha said the cause of suffering comes within ourselves. It is grasping and clinging and fixation that causes our suffering. And of all of those graspings and clingings, from these graspings and clinging, all of our mental afflictions arise. For example, when we cling to people, things, ideas, we like some of them and want them, and we dislike some of them and want to get away from them or hate them. And so these feelings of attachment, aversion, and then bewilderment, when we don't really care particularly about anything. So these three basic mental afflictions then give rise to all of the others: jealousy and competitiveness, pride, stinginess, all of the various kinds of mental afflictions all spring from these three basic mental afflictions: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. But all of those come down to one thing: self-grasping. If we didn't have a concept of me or I, we would not have grasping. We would not have aversion. We would not have ignorance or bewilderment if there wasn't a grasping towards self. So you could kind of call self-grasping the source of all mental affliction. And so people would say, well, in the third noble truth, the Buddha said, you can counteract the causes of suffering and thus unmake the causes of your suffering. In other words, let it go, let it go. Okay, so, but that is not a workable method for most people. You can't say to someone who's suffering, let it go. Why? Because they're overwhelmed with suffering. And it's unkind to try and give a simplistic answer to someone who's suffering. So what the Buddha did was, in the fourth noble truth, he taught us all of the methods of letting go. If you look at shamatha meditation is the basic letting go exercise. Anybody who's done shamatha knows how this works. You're sitting in meditation and you're staying with the breath, because again, you start by placing your attention on the breath in shamatha meditation. And then when your attention wanders, you bring it back over and over again. But you have to notice that you've wandered off. And that takes a little doing. But once you notice that and you come back, the thought that you were thinking that was distracting you basically disappears, pretty much without a trace. And this tells us something about the practice of letting go. Because when we let go of that thought in order to return our attention to the breath, the world that was created by that thought ends. The world that was created by by that thought is ended. It ends. And so and in this way, we learn the basics of letting go. If you can let go of one thought, just one thought in meditation and return your attention to the breath, you've actually seen the pathway to let go of anything, potentially to let go of anything. Some thoughts have a lot more habit energy behind them. They have a lot more habit energy behind them, and so they'll come back again and again and again. But the practice of letting those thoughts go and letting those thoughts go and letting those thoughts go over and over again is what allows us to see the potential for ourselves to let something go. And so that's I guess the first topic I wanted to cover, which was that all forms of meditation have benefits, and part of the benefits come from learning a simple practice of letting go of one thought in the moment. Does anybody have questions about this part? Anyone have questions about this first part? Anybody online have questions? Okay, well then we will do a little bit of sitting meditation together. And hey, Don, I got a favor to ask of you. Could you come and get this key? Because I think the people at the front door need it. I forgot to leave it with them. Yeah, sorry about this, folks. We got a crew today. Thank you very much. Yeah. Because one of the volunteers in the front on the front desk came looking for it, and I just realized I still had it. I still had the key on my belt. Sorry, folks. So we're going to do a little bit of shamatha meditation right now, and I think most of you in this room have received some shamatha instructions, so it won't be difficult. You can get a more complete instruction on shamatha meditation by coming to our Introduction to Meditation class any Sunday at KTC. It's also available on Zoom at 10 a.m. every Sunday. So in any case, if you want a more complete instruction, you can go there for your advice. Also, on the Columbus KTC YouTube channel, if you go to our series on the meditation marathon, we teach on the meditation marathon playlist, we teach basic meditation in a very complete form. So you've got a couple different ways to learn it if today's lesson is a little short. It begins by placing your body in a position of relative comfort and ease. For people sitting in the chair, this means they place their feet flat on the floor, and their hands can be down on their knees, palms downward on the knees. Now, it's good if your knees are lower than your hips as you sit in the chair, and it's also better if your feet actually touch the floor. So if your feet don't touch the floor, you can put a cushion under your feet so that your feet do touch the floor. And it's good to, when you're sitting in a chair, to sit with your feet hip width apart, because that's a relatively stable and comfortable posture. Now, those of you sitting on the floor, you can sit in any of the various cross-legged positions or use a kneeling bench if you like the Japanese kneeling benches. But in any case, it's important for your knees to be either at the same level as your hips or slightly below. Part of the reason for this is that when you sit, and I'm going to use my elbows as my knees and my shoulders as my hips in this example, if you're sitting with your knees above your hips, then that puts a lot of pressure on your hips and it can cause discomfort. So that's why they recommend on the same level or below. You can kind of see that it gives the body more support. And if you need extra cushioning, you can get like a bean bag or a few bean bags or maybe a rolled up towel and put them under your knees so that your knees are more comfortable as you sit. Whether you're sitting in a chair or sitting on the floor, you need to be grounded on your seat. And one of the techniques for doing this is to rock gently from side to side and tuck in the muscles of the backside so that you are solid on your seat. And whether you're sitting in a chair or sitting on the floor, you can sit with your back somewhat straight, and your hands can be on palm downward on the tops of your legs. Everybody's arm length is different, so let your arms rest comfortably. With your chin, we hold a lot of tension in our neck and our jaw. So for this, we tuck the chin in slightly as though to make a double chin. And then our eyes will be either closed or cast downward a few feet ahead. Now you have to understand the goal is eventually to have your eyes open for meditation, because we're not trying to shut out the world. But at first it might help you so you can see what works the best for you. If your eyes are open, they can be slightly open, and the gaze can be gentle and diffuse. Finally, the tongue can be touched to the upper palate or roof of the mouth, right behind the front teeth, and flattened a bit so that this releases the clenched muscles of the jaw. So this is the basic set of techniques: the legs, the seat, the back, the shoulders, hands, and arms, the chin, the gaze, and the tip of the tongue. Now, these techniques may not be a good match for everyone. So if it's not a good match for you, that's okay. You can adjust your posture to be more comfortable. And don't feel that you have to rigidly hold your posture. You can move at any time to adjust your posture. Now, what my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, said to do is once you get into the posture, just sit with the posture for a moment or two, just letting yourself settle into it. Then you can begin the technique of meditation with a mental intention. I'm going to use breath awareness meditation for the next few minutes to train my attention for the benefit of myself and everyone else. So it's altruistic and definite. Now that we've set our mental attitude, we can start the physical process by taking one deep breath through the nose if possible, and through your mouth if you're congested, and then breathing out. Then allow your breath to come and go naturally. You can place your attention on the breath in a couple of different ways. One is to follow the breath all the way into the lungs and all the way out, diffusing into space, all the way in and all the way out. You also could be merely aware of the sensation at the nostrils as the breath comes and goes. What you'll notice as you do this is that your attention will stay briefly with the breath, and then it will wander a bit, maybe into something that happened in the past, maybe something that's going to happen in the future, or maybe something in the now, in the moment. And you start thinking about it. So the technique when that happens is to notice the distraction. You can even label it thinking. Then you consciously let go of the thought and consciously and purposefully return your attention to the breath and think of it as a fresh start. Watching the breath, noticing the distraction, letting go of the distraction, and returning. So we'll do this for about 2 or 3 minutes and see how it works. Placing the body in the position of meditation, placing the attention on the breath, and letting your attention return each time it wanders. Concluding the meditation, you open your eyes if they've been closed, and you can look up and be with the world again. Does anyone have questions about the method or technique of meditation? Most folks have learned it, so it's not unusual. Are there any questions coming from the online audience? Okay, good. All right. Then what you've learned now is the basic technique that Tonglen compassion meditation is based on. That is the basic technique, just observing the breath as it comes in and observing the breath as it goes out. That's it. That's what compassion meditation is based on. And so learning how to do that practice is very beneficial. The practice of shamatha, as we've mentioned, it allows us to learn how to let go of a thought. Sometimes when we let go of a thought, it stays gone. Sometimes when we let go of a thought, it just comes right back. But the more we practice it, the better we become at noticing and letting go and returning. And so this practice of shamatha will help you in every different type of meditation that we do here, whether it's compassion and love meditation or mantra meditation or any other kind. Oh, there is a question from the audience. Yes.
Are there any techniques for when you get sleepy while meditating?
Yes, when you yes, if you get sleepy, I'm basing my responses on Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's book Dharma Paths, because he describes this in his book in Dharma Paths. There are 2 kinds of problems people can encounter when they meditate. One is sleepiness, and the other is agitation. So the remedies for these 2 are somewhat similar. If you're agitated, then I'm sorry, we'll start with the sleepy because that's what the person asked about. So if you're sleepy, one of the things you can do is you can raise your gaze up from the floor and open your eyes, which will help you feel less sleepy. And if that's helpful, great. But if that's not helpful, you can use a visualization by casting your gaze upward and imagining that there is a shaft of light going up into space away from you. There's just this shaft of light. And as your breath leaves you, it goes up into this shaft of light. And when it comes back to you, when that breath comes back to you, it comes back to you in the form of light. And that light enters you're through the nostrils as you're breathing it in. You imagine that that light then illuminates you from the inside, as though you were a light bulb and the light is the filament. And so in this way, you would follow the breath going up into and coming back from this shaft of light for as many breaths as it takes for you to lighten up from the sleepiness. That will, if it dispels the sleepiness, then you stop working with the light and return to the method of meditation you were using before you became sleepy, which is just simple breath awareness. Now, if you're agitated and have lots of thoughts, you can begin by having, if your gaze has been up, allowing your gaze to drop to the floor again, because sometimes it wanders upward and people become agitated and then it has to fall again. But you can also imagine that there is a shaft of darkness going into the earth in front of you, and that your breath can then come out and go down into that dark shaft. And then when the breath comes back, it comes back as darkness. And Rinpoche is so cute because in his book, he says, you can illuminate your body with darkness. Okay, it's a little bit of a confusing metaphor, but you can just imagine that that darkness then quiets the agitation. And again, you would only do this technique as long as you need to in order to dispel the agitation. Was there another question online? Okay, that's good. So we've covered the two main, yes, and I'll repeat the question for you.
In the input meditation plan, they teach you to count your breath. What's the purpose of it?
Oh, sure. The person is asking what the purpose of counting the breath is, because counting the breath is frequently taught as a method of meditation, of helping to keep your awareness, on, you're helping to keep your awareness fresh. So that in this technique, the breath would come in and the breath would go out, and then you would mentally count 1, in breath, out breath, mentally count 1, in breath, out breath, mentally count 2, and so forth. I call that like an extra tether on your attentiveness, because really all of these techniques are about maintaining attention to the breath, because sometimes you need a lot of props to prop up your attentiveness so that you will notice when you are not attentive. So some people like to have more props up under their attention at the beginning, but then they can discard them as they get more experience with meditation. However, that being said, I know several people who said, man, that counting, it made me crazy. That counting made me crazy. So I had to stop doing it right away. And that's fine. Even after all these years, I still start with counting. And then I let it go. But yeah, so everybody's different. And so when Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was teaching the methods, he said there are several props under your attention. He didn't use that word, but he said there's several of these helpers. The counting is a helper. He said, you can drop that first because it's usually the first to go anyway. Then attention to the in-breath can go, and you can only be attentive to the out-breath, and that makes it even simpler. And then finally, he said, you can let go of the attention to the out-breath and merely be with the sensation of the breath coming and going. Everybody is different. And so for many people, they need to follow the breath all the way in, follow the breath all the way out, and count in order to stay attentive. But for other people, it's not such a workable technique, but that's the function of all of these things, including counting, is to allow us, it props up our attention so that we notice more easily that we have become distracted. For some people, they don't know that they've been distracted until they're like 2 minutes into some kind of reverie, or fantasy. But does that answer the question for you? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we do tend to teach it at the 10 o'clock class. I skipped it today because I knew we were short on time, but I appreciate you asking about it because I'm sure when anybody asks a question, there's got to be at least 3 other people would have the same question. So I appreciate you asking because I did skip it today. Other question? Yes. Help for that. Yeah, the person is saying that whenever she meditates, her legs fall asleep, and I get that. Show me how you're sitting, just for fun here. Oh, yeah, okay, I can see 2 things going on here. Yeah, okay, I can see a couple things going on with the posture. I think what happens is that the way that you're sitting, I mean, it's basically good. You probably would benefit from a slightly higher cushion. Slightly higher than what you have. You might, put another one underneath here to kind of prop it up a bit to see if that makes your hips go forward a little bit. And if your hips go forward just a little bit, that might take some of the pressure off the ankles. And that's one thing you can try and see if that helps. The other thing you can try is the rolled up towel. Put a rolled up towel under your knees to prevent them from putting pressure on your ankles. Because that's what happened to me too. Because when I first started sitting, I sat with my knees way above my hips, and oh man, it made my back hurt something fierce until I figured out what I was supposed to, how it was supposed to work. And then after that, my ankles fell asleep because my legs were crossed. And so eventually I uncrossed them. And I started out sitting like this, and now I sit like this. But that's only because I have the capacity to do that, because you have to have your hip flexors have to be kind of, so if you work with a yoga teacher, that also, you could try all of those methods. First, I would try sitting on a slightly higher cushion first. Try that first and see if that pushes your hips forward just enough to take the pressure off those ankles. So give it a shot and see what happens, and come back, and then we can work on it. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Great question. These are really, these are great questions. Okay. I would like to teach a little bit of the method of Tonglen before we have our break. So I'm going to do that next. Charlie, could you help me hand these out? And over here, Jeff, could you hand some out on? I don't think I have enough of these. Did anybody print it out at home? She printed, oh, thank goodness. Last night when I was printing these out, we only had a couple, 11 people registered. So that's, anyway, so I didn't make enough copies. But I think if you print it out at home, you can, and then I'm going to need one after all that. Actually, I'll use my laptop. Never mind. I've got it on my laptop. Yeah, that's good. No worries. I got it on my laptop. Anybody who has done presentations before, anyone who's done presentations before, know that it's a really bad idea to give people handouts when you're trying to teach them something, because then they spend all their time reading the handout and don't listen to what you're saying. Are you missing one, hon? Oh, got it. Okay. I got you. Okay. Yeah. So, stand by here. I lost my copy of it. Okay, here we go. So I know it's kind of like it's a big no-no to hand out handouts when you're trying to get people to listen to you. But we're going to actually just walk through this whole thing together, just the first page. And then I'm going to have you put it aside so we can practice. How to do the practice of sending and receiving meditation. The word tong, T-O-N-G, means to send, and len, L-E-N, means to take, sending and taking. And so I'm going to say, everybody have a copy? Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had their copy in front of them. So you have one too? In front of you? Okay, you got it? Okay, awesome. Okay, I didn't see it, so I was like, oh my gosh. No. So here's what Rinpoche says. This is from page 118 of his book, Dharma Paths. He says, in addition to gaining an intellectual understanding of bodhicitta, or love and compassion, from the teachings, it's important to have a practical experience of the practice of bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is the mind of enlightenment, or the mind of love and compassion. To that end, he says there's a meditation practice called sending and receiving, or Tonglen, that can help you develop the enlightened attitude. When you do this short meditation, so this is the first time he says it's brief, sit in the meditation posture, relaxing your body and sitting rather comfortably. Then, breathing normally, follow the natural course of your breath. Imagine that the exhalation of your breath, whatever you have accumulated, whatever merit you have accumulated from beginningless time, are accumulating now and will accumulate in the future, radiates toward all sentient beings. Just as when the sun shines, the rays of light radiate toward all places. So with your exhalation, these positive qualities radiate, bringing happiness, well-being, comfort, health, and longevity to all beings without discrimination. And I see that when the person retyped this for me, they left out the word merit from the third line of that paragraph. Whatever merit or goodness that you have accumulated. So if you want to add that in, you can add that back in. So that's what we do on the exhalation. Khenpo Rinpoche said the exhalation is training in love, because the Buddhist definition of love is wishing for others to be happy. That's the Buddhist definition of love, wishing for others to be happy. So then on the in-breath, when we breathe in, he said, imagine that you're breathing in all of the suffering, confusion, sickness, turmoil, and conflict of sentient beings. All the suffering and turmoil of sentient beings merges with you, and this uproots the suffering and confusion of the sentient beings. Because of the strength of bodhicitta, the power of your sincere attitude of wanting to benefit others, as soon as the suffering merges with you, it dissolves into nothing and disappears. And then he uses an example. It is just as if you had collected some dust together into a little pile and a strong wind blew it away. Inhaling and exhaling in this way, meditate for a short time. So that's the basic method of meditating on Tonglen. Now, not everybody's comfortable doing this. So if it's only comfortable for you to train in the exhalation where you're giving happiness to others, do that. But if you would like to also practice compassion, because love is the wish for others to be happy, compassion is the wish for them to be free of suffering. So on the out breath, you're practicing love by imagining that you give away all of your goodness to all sentient beings. And when you breathe in and remove the suffering from all beings, you're practicing compassion. Now, this is imaginary happiness that you're giving away, so you're not really giving away your happiness because you can't anyway, it's yours. But you imagine that you are giving it away. This exercise is an exercise of your imagination. And by imagining that you give it away, you are training your mind in the attitude of love. Khenpo Rinpoche said Tonglen is mainly about training your attitude to be more kind and loving. So there's that. So you can train in that on the out breath. And then on the in-breath, you train on removing the suffering from sentient beings. And it's imaginary suffering. And so, and he also gives you something to do with this imaginary suffering. He says, when this imaginary suffering comes to you, it meets with your pure motivation, your pure bodhisattva motivation. And that is that your motivation is so altruistic and pure that all of the suffering dissolves into nothing and disappears. And somebody might say, well, maybe he didn't mean to say that, but he did, because he then followed it with an example of the little pile of dust. You know, it's like it's blown away. And so that's actually the entirety of Tonglen practice, is imagining that you give happiness and goodness to all beings on the out breath, and imagining that you remove suffering from beings on the in breath. And that when that in breath reaches you, it dissolves, all the suffering dissolves into nothing, and then you breathe out again. Now, earlier, a questioner asked, well, how do you imagine all sentient beings? That's a lot. What I do is I think of those old movies where they had a cast of thousands. You just imagine everybody as though they're in a giant crowd in front of you. Now, if you say that's a lot of people, I can't imagine that many. That's okay. It's your visualization, so you can make it do what you want. If you just see a small crowd and imagine that it's all sentient beings, then it's all sentient beings. Even if you can't see a giant crowd, just know that there's a giant crowd of beings in front of you. And that as you breathe out, you think you give them all of your goodness. And as you breathe in, you remove all of their suffering. And again, this is your imagination. So one of the teachers told me, you can't expect your imagination to see things as clearly as your eyes do, because you're using your imagination. And the imagination, the images come and go. They waver and sometimes disappear entirely. The reason for this, he said, is that most of us have not practiced shamatha meditation to the point where we can just relax our mind at will. We can't really relax our mind at will and have it stay there. Our mind wavers and runs around. So because our attention is wavering and running around, sometimes the visualization will waver and run around. It will be there for a second and then it'll be gone again. And then it'll come back for a second and then it'll be gone again. But what we're trying to do with Tonglen is carry through the intention to train the mind on the out breath and to train the mind on the in breath. Okay, you see what I mean? So you want to do the meditation for a minute, or do you have a question before we start? Because we'll do another like 2 minutes of meditation using this technique. Any questions before we get started? Yes.
So, take some time to do the drawing in of problems and first for a while, a few breaths before you start hearing how.
The questioner is asking if the breathing in and removing suffering and the breathing out and giving happiness should be sequential together, or if you should do one for a while and then add the other one in. It is going to depend on you, because it's meant to be done together. One in breath of removing suffering, one out breath of giving happiness, one in breath of removing suffering, one out breath of giving happiness. But if it's really difficult, then I would start just with the being aware of giving happiness for a while and then try to add in the removal of suffering. You know, just do the out breath and pay attention to the out breath for a while and just give happiness and give happiness and give happiness. You're never going to run out, you know. You're never going to run out of happiness, you know, because it's imaginary. It's imaginary. It's, again, what Rinpoche said is that you're not an enlightened being yet. He says enlightened beings, they actually can remove the suffering from others and they actually can give happiness to others. He said, but we're not at that level yet. So he says, we're just training our attitude. So he said, that's mainly the benefit of this practice, is to train our attitude to be more kind and to be more loving. And so that's what's happening in the practice. Does that help for you? Yeah. Other questions that people might have? Anybody online? Okay. Well, I did promise that we would do a little session of this practice before the break, so we're going to do that now. So again, you place your body in the posture of meditation, feet flat on the floor, hands on your turn palm downward on your legs. And if you're sitting on the floor, your legs are crossed. And you make the mental attitude, I'm going to be practicing meditation for the next little while for the benefit of myself and all beings. Breathing in, we take one deep breath and breathe out. And then just quietly breathe in and out before you do the visualization. Just establish a little attention on your breath as it comes and goes. Next, as your breath goes out, think that you give goodness to all sentient beings in the form of a light, and that it touches them and benefits them. We'll just do that for a moment, just the out breath, just sending goodness. And now you can think that as you breathe in, you remove all of the suffering and difficulty from beings. On the in-breath, that it meets your bodhisattva motivation, and all of that suffering dissolves into nothing and disappears. And you can do them now together. Out breath, giving happiness, in breath, removing suffering. And we'll do this for a moment or two. And now, to conclude the Tonglen meditation, I'm just going to read I'm going to read from Rinpoche's instructions. He says, after you've meditated in this way for a short while, let go of the mental focus and let your mind rest in a state of awareness. Attempt to have the sense that there are no sentient beings to meditate on. There's no person meditating, and there's no act of meditation taking place. Try to transcend these three, which are relative, and give birth to something ultimate, something effortless and spontaneous, like the arising and disappearing of clouds in the sky. Just remain in a state of clarity. There is no act, no thought of doing something, outside or inside, no you doing something. Just cut all of that off and remain in a state of awareness. Okay, that's a short session of Tonglen. We'll take questions for about 5 minutes and then we'll have our break. Questions? What was that like? Yes. Mhm.
So my difficulty is in the span of the in-breath, the span of the out-breath, social thing,
Yeah,
that the in-breath, visualizing, thinking.
Yeah.
and out-breath, visualize things, see the body.
Right.
as in-breath, and,
mhm,
and it's very, I know it's.
Yeah.
practice,
Mhm.
But it is so hard to do all those things.
Yeah, it is a lot. Yeah. Then I would actually do, the questioner is saying it's really hard to do all those things. It's hard to think about giving goodness. It's hard to think about removing suffering. And it's just hard. So I would, because I think these two questions are actually related. The previous questioner's question about working into it. So I would say then just start with giving happiness and then do that for a period of time. What I tell people to do is you can use your prayer beads as a timer. So I mean, you can set a timer, but then if the timer goes off, it'll kind of jolt you a little bit. So you can like, measure off a quarter or a half. I wouldn't go more than a half and just hold the beads in your hand, in breath, out breath, move a bead, in breath, out breath, move a bead. And then you're going back to the end. You start toward that and then you end at the head bead. But you can also set a timer for 2 minutes because that's about 2 minutes. And so then just only work on the out breath for a while and then do another 2 minutes only working on the in breath. And then, because now I can understand where the questions are coming from on this because it's a lot. But you can also just use a feeling tone, just like giving goodness. That's pretty simple, giving goodness. And then the rest of it will come, giving goodness. It's 2 words. And just go with the feeling of what that feels like. You don't have to think about white light, just giving goodness, see? And removing suffering on the in-breath, removing suffering. You can try that too, because that way it's a little simpler. Giving goodness, removing suffering, right? Does that? And then that way you don't have to think about all sentient beings. You don't have to think about the light and the darkness and yeah. I think I told Kempo Karthar Rinpoche one time that people were having trouble with the light and the dark. And he said, well, then just work with the feeling of happiness and goodness. Don't worry about color or any of that kind of stuff. So you might try it. You can do it either way, doing mostly the out breath for 2 minutes and then doing mostly the in breath for 2 minutes, because that way you get used to both feelings. Or just keeping it simple by using the feeling tone of giving goodness and the feeling tone of removing suffering. Does that help? Okay, give it a shot. Yes, from the internet.
Okay. Can one visualize each of the 6 realms and do Tonglen for them?
Yes, the Buddha said that samsara, this world of suffering that we are in, there are 6 basic states of suffering. And these 6 basic states of suffering correspond to the 5 or 6 types of basic mental affliction. Now, you remember from earlier in the talk, we talked about 3 mental afflictions: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. But there are 2 more, which are pride and jealousy. But you can even go as far as 6 and add in stinginess. And so the result of each of these types of predominating karmic thoughts and actions, the result of it is to experience the world as hell, or to experience the world as a world of deprivation and poverty, to experience the world as being ruled by instinct, like animals. Then there's the human realm of constant wanting, and then the upper realms of what they call the jealous gods, and then the gods who are so prideful and so full of happiness that they don't even bother to practice any kind of meditation. They don't need to because they're having a good time. So these six realms, you can, if you want to, emphasize that, or because that's a lot to think about, I say all of samsara is probably the easiest way to go at first. But yes, of course, you could definitely do that. The Chenrezig mantra practice also features a prayer for each one of the six realms to liberate the beings there. So I appreciate that question. Another question from me, yeah. From the Zoom audience.
Yes, that person also asked about using the mala for support. So you covered that before I got to it. Can you also use a phrase such as, I give this merit and happiness to all beings, along with the visualization, or is it recommended to focus on visualization
Yeah,
alone?
well, you know, I think the person is onto something there, although I would keep it simpler. You know, giving goodness, removing suffering, just keep it from becoming overly wordy, because words spark a lot of thoughts and feelings, right? So we're trying to train in specific thoughts and feelings. So I think it'd be better to keep it simple. Yes.
Should you practice Tonglen every day?
Yes, the answer is absolutely. It's incredibly important to try to practice it regularly, because because the whole idea of practicing any kind of meditation is to do it regularly so that the benefits of that meditation will come to you. It's cumulative. That's the way Rinpoche put it. He says it's better to meditate for just a short period of time every day, even if it's just 5 minutes. It's better to do a little meditation every day and get into the habit of doing it than it is to do lots of meditation on one day, but nothing for the next 10 days. He says you won't get the same benefits. And Rinpoche does say in his instruction that Tonglen is meant to be short. So you are not trying to work up to doing an hour of Tonglen. It's not the point. The point of Tonglen is to train the attitude. So he wants you to do it for just a short time, so it's fresh, you know, so yeah, what, okay. This will be the last question before the break, unfortunately, because we do need a break.
Okay. At our KTC, we begin Tonglen by first focusing on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. Is there a preliminary practice that you suggest before beginning Tonglen?
When you do Tonglen as an everyday practice, and you undertake the practice of Tonglen as your daily discipline, yes, there is a way to begin a session of Tonglen that involves praying to the Buddha as your teacher and doing something called guru yoga, where you imagine that you receive a blessing from the Buddha. That's step 1. You take refuge in and then receive a blessing from the Buddha. Second is a reflection on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind toward Dharma, thinking about the preciousness of our life, the impermanence of our life, the truth of karma, and then finally the defects of samsaric grasping. That's a second thing that you can do, and then you do the Tonglen, and then the dedication. But that's when you're turning Tonglen into an everyday discipline and practice in the context of something called lo jong, or mind training. Lo means mind and jong means training. So lo jong, when you undertake Tonglen as part of a larger training for yourself, then yes, you would do all of those parts. But today I wanted to introduce just the discipline of sending and receiving. And I would encourage people to add it to your quiet sitting meditation practice. If you're doing a quiet sitting meditation every day, then you would do the Tonglen perhaps at the beginning, perhaps at the end. Usually people put it at the end, and then they end their meditation and dedicate the merit of that session. So I appreciate that. If there are other questions, we'll hold them for the second part of the program. So because of time, we'll take about a 5-minute break here. I'll set my little timer for 5 minutes. And I guess we better make it 7, so everybody gets a chance to kind of run up and down the stairs once, and and use the restroom. So see you in 7 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. That's all. That's. It's because I want to. Yeah, it's fun. This is all. Yeah, I'm heading down something. Marty. Yeah. Oh, yeah, just so much money for yeah. So, and I have to go to this, I know, the stuff on the top and then all this as I said. Yeah. Yeah, it's a different kettle of food. Yeah. He said, yeah, but that's great. We're good with you because you can't go wrong when you study scriptures. You might need to have somebody explain it to you because they'll get it complicated, you know. So stand by, I'll bring those to you. And cats. I know. Good, good, start down. I get really stretchy. And history is quite a lot because and then all the kinds of things missionaries who live in China, India, and so here's a monument. So I think we and so it's one of the shores. Yeah. And so here's and so you can wear them around a bit. Yeah. Adam. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's so much. It's
Let's see if that does it. Is it still backwards? No, all right, all right. Yeah, all right. So as you can see, this is that Tonglen is has the potential to be a very beneficial practice if you can do it on a regular basis. And so what I would recommend is that you try to add Tonglen to your everyday practice of Dharma. And by doing a little bit of it every day, that will hopefully help you to incorporate more love and compassion practice into your everyday life. We all need more love in our life. It's this just without a doubt, because the world is a very harsh place sometimes. And there's a lot of unhappiness in the world. And as the one person asked, is there any way to do Tonglen for the earth? And the answer is yes, you can. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that you can start your Tonglen practice doing your Tonglen in your session for someone you love and that you naturally feel compassion toward. It could be a person, it could be one of your pets, it could be any being. And that you would start by doing Tonglen for that individual. But then he said you can't just do it for an individual. He says it's good to broaden out and then eventually do Tonglen for all beings, because that way nobody gets left out. This is a little bit difficult because some people because of who they are or what they've done stand outside the fence of our love and compassion. In other words, we don't like them, or maybe we even hate them. And sometimes that person is ourselves. that we feel dislike for. And so in this case, it's important for us to start with the beings who need extra love and compassion. And it could be the people you think of as being suffering right now in places where there's war. Or it could be that it's the people who are in your own family who are suffering and who need your help. But then broaden it out. You can even do it for yourself if you're feeling overwhelmed. If you're feeling depressed or overwhelmed, you can think of yourself as being in front of you. As you breathe out, give yourself healing. As you breathe in, remove and comfort yourself in your suffering. You know, like, I'll take that for you, because that's really the attitude of the person who's training in Tonglen. I'll take that for you. I'll take that for you. And then you give out and give out goodness. So you can even do this for yourself. When you're feeling sad or overwhelmed or angry, breathe in and remove your suffering. Breathe out and give yourself healing. But then Rinpoche said, don't do it just for yourself. Then do it for everybody who feels like you. Everyone who's going through what you're going through, because we are never alone in what we are going through. Someone else in the world is going through exactly what we're going through right now. And if we think about all of them, it's helpful. A woman called me one time and wanted to talk because she had had the sort of tragic experience of losing a child through miscarriage. And she was very concerned because she had gotten pregnant again and was very worried about the health of her child. And so I said, well, let's start by thinking of every other mother right now who is experiencing the feelings that you're experiencing. And then I said, imagine that they're all there with you and that you're giving them all the biggest hug. And say, you know, like, I'm here with you and we're here together and we'll get through this together. And then do Tonglen for all of those, for yourself and for all of those mothers. And then after that, then you do it for all beings who are all suffering in one way or another. And she said that it helped. So, because there's so much that we have, you know, there's so much suffering in the world and there's so much that each of us experience, and it's important to be able to do this kind of practice. Now, what you'll notice after a while of doing this practice is a couple of little side effects may happen. One of the side effects is that you might become aware of your own compassion and love, but you may also become aware of your own lack of compassion and lack of love. One person said to me, I used to think I was a pretty nice guy. And then I started meditating and I realized how many times I am trashing people silently in my thoughts. Oh, that person's bad, or that person's bad, or that person's bad. And he said, I think I'm accumulating some negative habits, you know, and that's going to lead to negative karma, right? And I say, yep, over time, these negative habits of thinking translate into negative habits of more negative habits of thinking, and then negative words, and then negative actions. He said, so I said, it's probably good if you can notice it now. It's better to notice it and work with it than to not notice it at all. Because otherwise your friends will all bring it up. You know, because you know, your friends will start saying, boy, something's really happened to you, you know, I'm worried about you, and so on and so forth. So that will be the major thing that you will notice, your thoughts a little bit more. You'll notice your thoughts a little bit more. And at first it's a little bit overwhelming because you realize you have responsibility for those thoughts. Those are your thoughts. And you then need to work with your thoughts. And that's where the post-meditation practices of Tonglen comes in, because the earlier questioner was saying, is it possible? Is there a way to make this a daily practice? And the answer is absolutely. Through taking on the discipline of Lojong practice. Again, Lo, L-O, means mind, and Jong, J-O-N-G, means training, mind training. And mind training is about training the mind in love and compassion. And there is an on the cushion practice called the meditation of Tonglen. And there's an off the cushion practice, which is called post meditation Tonglen. In post meditation Tonglen, I'm going to direct your attention to the article I handed out because post meditation Tonglen is actually talked about in the second of these articles that's in your handout. If you turn to page 2, the article using Tonglen in daily life, I would like to draw your attention to, let me see, it looks like it's page 3. Page, it's page 2 of 3 of the article. It's the third page for you folks because I added a page to it. It's under the heading Tonglen in Daily Life. It's in the left-hand side column. Here's what Rinpoche had to say about this. Tonglen is not just for when you're sitting in meditation. It should be part of your life wherever you go, wherever you live, work, or eat. When you walk, review thoughts like these in your mind. May all beings experience happiness. May I take upon myself the sufferings of all beings. When you inhale, you can think, may I be able to take on others' suffering. See, even if you can't do it right now, may I be able to do it in the future. You can think like that. And when you exhale, think, may I be able to give others merit and happiness. And in fact, Rinpoche says you can use your own conflicting emotions to practice Tonglen. The text on this practice, which is The Great Path of Awakening by Jamgon Khantrul, gives a slogan about this: 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seats of virtue. When training the mind as beginners, we still have a lot of neurotic thoughts, but we must know how to handle them. The text implies that we can transform conflicting emotions into virtue, but how can we practice this? First, he said we must apply mindfulness. For example, the moment we are aware that we are experiencing anger or another conflicting emotion, we should think, may I experience the neurosis or the neurotic emotion of all sentient beings, and may all sentient beings be free of that particular neurotic emotion. The emotion itself is not positive, but the way you have handled it is positive, and you have actually accumulated merit. Similarly, when you make a mistake out of confusion, instead of giving yourself a hard time, you should accept the mistake and realize that it arises from the confusions that come from negative karma. Think, everybody has made these mistakes, so now I take on all of their confusion. So even if you make a mistake out of confusion, it can become an object of virtue. In short, you try to make it a habit to think of other sentient beings' welfare and practice accordingly. He said you have to be able to practice everywhere. When you're practicing anything, meditation, a sadhana, which is a chanting meditation, or whatever, think, I am practicing to benefit living beings in the beginning, middle, and end of the practice. You can even transform sleep into the practice of virtue. You can go to sleep thinking, I will help living beings. If you go to sleep with that, your sleep will benefit living beings. But you must remember to do this every time you go to sleep, even when you wake up during the night and then return to sleep. Since we need to have a technique for accumulating merit in everyday life, even if we can't sit down and practice, if we can think of others, we are practicing. If we enjoy a meal and we think of sharing the joy with others, that is practice. So in this way, every activity of life can become practice. So we must immediately mentally share any happiness and joy we feel and immediately take on the suffering of others when they're upset and so on. Tibetans are trained to think, if something makes me happy, may all sentient beings share in this happiness. If I meet circumstances of suffering or frustration, may my suffering eliminate the sufferings of all sentient beings. In this way, Tonglen is the origin of immeasurable merit, and by practicing it, we break through fear and ego clinging. With it, we become courageous and tolerant and willing to work for the benefit of beings. And so that's what Rinpoche had to say about taking your Tonglen practice into post-meditation. So the next section, the very last section of this page, slogan number 8, 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. There's a big paragraph. He says, Jamgon Khantrul, this is from his book on Tonglen and Lojong practice. He says, the 3 poisons continually arise in connection with 3 objects. Compulsive attachment arises for objects that are pleasant or useful. Aversion arises for objects that are unpleasant or harmful, and stupidity or indifference for other objects. Recognize these poisons as soon as they arise. Then, for example, when attachment arises, think like this, quote, may every bit of every sentient being's attachment be contained in this attachment of mine. May all sentient beings have the seed of virtue of being free of attachment. May this attachment of mine contain all their disturbing emotions, and until they attain Buddhahood, may they be free of such disturbing emotions, unquote. Aversion and other emotions are used in practice by working with them the same way. Thus, the 3 poisons become 3 limitless seeds of virtue. So that means even when you're feeling negative, if you can use it to practice with, it isn't harmful, as harmful as it would be if you acted on that negative thought. We have a lot of negative thoughts and we don't act on them, but we do act on some of our negative thoughts. But if instead of acting on our negative thoughts instantly or immediately out of habit, if instead we think about it for a second and realize, you know, this kind of mental affliction never led me in a good direction. So giving into this anger or giving into this jealousy or giving into this whatever, giving into this is not going to help me. So what I am going to do right now is I'm going to do Tonglen with this emotion. And then you can actually read the text that's here. May every bit of every being's attachment be contained in this attachment or aversion of mine. You read the whole verse, you read the whole thing. And so what I tell people to do is if you want to make Tonglen a daily practice, what you would do would be to do some Tonglen on your cushion every day as part of your shamatha practice, your quiet sitting, and then add a little Tonglen to the end, and then read this phrase every day. May every bit of every sentient being's attachment be contained in this attachment of mine. You can fill in the blank and say, may every bit of every sentient being's mental affliction, fill in the blank, be contained in this mental affliction of mine. May all sentient beings have the seed of virtue of being free of mental affliction. And may this mental affliction of mine contain all their disturbing emotions, and until they attain Buddhahood, may they be free of such disturbing emotions. And if you recite that out loud once a day while you're sitting on your meditation seat, or a friend of mine taped it to her bathroom mirror and read it out loud every day. If you read it out loud every day for 6 months, 8 months, a year, over that time, you will get it memorized. And once you have it memorized, it will start popping up for you in the midst of your everyday experience. Like, oh yeah, I'm starting to get angry now, so now's the time to use this. Or I'm extremely happy right now. I'm very happy. May I share my happiness with all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have good food. May all sentient beings have wonderful gifts. May all sentient beings have everything they need. And this is something that we can do. And this is how it becomes a daily practice. As I was mentioning in the morning, and the first part of the morning session, there is a formal practice of Lojong, and it's really good to get the reading transmission for the Lojong training slogans. There are 59 Lojong training slogans. And I'll try to do a second part of this lecture on another day. I just wanted to teach Tonglen today to see if there was interest in it. In the next the next Saturday program I do on this, I'll teach about the all over training in Tonglen and Lojong as a daily practice. And if people would like to undertake it, I can give the reading transmission for the 59 mind training slogans, and people can kind of dig in and get started. And then we might try to meet on a regular basis. I often thought that we should have a Lojong support group of people who are trying to do this, right? Who are trying to have this kind of training, trying to do this kind of training. Now, I told you that it changed my life. I am not joking. I was present when Rinpoche gave the teaching that is quoted on pages 2 and 3, 2, 3, and 4 of this book. I was present. These are my notes that I checked over with everybody. And that hit me just so hard that I could actually use my mental afflictions, of which I had many. I was just out of college at the time, and I had a lot of mental afflictions. I had a bumper crop, you might say, but I didn't know what to do with them. I had tried all the things that everybody else tries, drugs, sex, rock and roll. Tried all that stuff, but it didn't work. But this worked. This actually changed how I experienced my mind. And through working with this, I'm not an enlightened being. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But by the same token, I don't have the fear of my mental afflictions that I had when I was younger. I was really afraid of them when I was younger. But now I don't have that same fear. And so for me, it was very liberating to experience this teaching and to hear this teaching from my teacher, which is why I took so much pains to quote directly from what he said. So let's open things up for questions, because we've got about 10, or maybe we might go to 5 minutes after the hour, but I want to respect your time. So are there questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. The questioner is talking about the in Lojong texts. This is actually written in some Lojong mind training texts, that you first start doing Tonglen for people you naturally care about, and then gradually expand the group of people you're meditating for to include those you feel kind of indifferent toward. And then finally, you try to do Tonglen for people that you are in active conflict with. And the questioner is wondering how you practice like that. That is part of the discipline of doing Lojong, is to start with people that you care for. But today, in this introductory lecture, I didn't want to go that deep into it. So I started with the simplest possible Lojong and Tonglen instruction, which was the one that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave in Dharma Paths. The reason I like to start with this general one, this general easy Tonglen, is because it's so accessible compared to other things. It's really, really, yeah. Is it backwards again?
Slipping, it's about to come off.
Oh, it's about to come off. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I've got, oh no, that's quite all right. I've got tiny ears. So I have, my ears are incredibly small, and everything, the loops on the masks fall off. I mean, everything, anyhow, but thank you for caring about the audio quality. I do appreciate that. So that I kept it completely simple for that reason, because for me, it's easier to just say you're doing Tonglen for all sentient beings. And then if you've got a conflict with somebody, you can put them in there and it won't hurt you very much because they're in this giant crowd. But yes, you definitely can. But Khenpo Rinpoche warns against always doing Tonglen for just one person. He says it's not good in the long run, because he said it could, if you only ever do Tonglen for somebody you love, he said you could actually accidentally increase your clinging to that person. So that's why he said you always, if you start with one person, you always then move outward and do it for more and more and more beings until you are doing Tonglen for all beings without any exceptions. Because that way you broaden everything. So it broadens over time. At first, there will be people that you can't imagine doing Tonglen for, but later you can slip them into the crowd, but then eventually you'll be able to do Tonglen even for people you're in active conflict with. So I'm not sure, did that kind of address it for you, or what part's left? Sure. Again, yeah. Well, sure. Yeah, the questioner is asking, well, what about wars and conflicts such as the war in Ukraine? Well, it's again, Rinpoche would say you could start doing it for all the people who are suffering, but you also, as you pointed out, you also would need to do it not just for the victims of war, but for the perpetrators of war. You have to be able to do Tonglen for everyone without exception, because that's really how compassion is developed, by doing it for all beings without exception. So again, you could start with a particular group of people or with the earth, which somebody asked about, but then you have to end up with all beings everywhere, because he said that way it increases, it just increases your love. Because he says over time, it actually will increase your love and it will increase your compassion. Yes, question from the internet. Yes. Thank you for the question. And we can always talk more if I still didn't satisfy the follow-up. Yes.
Well, first, we do have some people on here who are expressing interest in another class and the support group, and asking that the next class also be on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
People out of
We'll make
state.
sure we get everything on Zoom. Yeah.
Great. And the question, what is the difference between Tonglen and metta meditation?
Tonglen and metta. I actually think they're really, really related. Metta is taught in the Theravadan tradition and the Pali tradition. And I kind of think they're the same thing, to be honest with you. But I think because in metta, you only do the giving of goodness to others, and it's not keyed to the breath at all. It's just that you think, I give myself happiness, and then you broaden out. Then I give it to people. I give happiness to I wish and give happiness to all. And the idea is like, I wish for myself to be happy. I wish for others to be happy. I wish for this and this and this, until you're thinking about and wishing for the happiness of all beings. May everyone feel happiness and so forth. And it's not keyed to the breath at all. So I think that's the major difference, is that it's not keyed to the breath. And the second is that the compassion component, which some people find troublesome, is missing from metta, which is fine, because really love and compassion, you can't do one without the other. Let's be honest here. So even just giving and imagining that you give goodness to everyone. And I think that's the other part of it. It's not that we're wishing for happiness for all beings. We're actually giving our happiness to all beings. And we're not just wishing for them to be free from suffering. We're actually taking it for them. So I think that that's the major difference, is that it's a little more, it's very, very personal in an almost intrusive way, which is, I think, the point. It's the point, because going all the way back to the Four Noble Truths, remember, the cause of suffering, the root cause of all suffering is selfishness and self-fixation. And how do you decrease self-fixation over time, okay, without going the opposite direction and becoming self-denigrating? And I feel that Tonglen is the method for being both a bodhisattva in training and working against your own ego fixation all at once. It does it in a way that's measured and then doesn't turn you into a martyr. You see what I'm saying? Because mental affliction and selfishness can even hijack compassion. and love and make it all about us. And so we've got to try to find a way to mediate that, if that's, so in the end, I think that they are different, but they're great. They're both great, and they both serve an important function. Because I feel like it's much easier to do metta. Let's face it, it is much easier, and therefore it is more accessible, and and in some ways, it has a more profound impact because it's so accessible. You don't have to think about, oh, I don't want to take on the sufferings of others. I mean, Khenpo Rinpoche said, it's imaginary suffering. It is not going to hurt you, but a lot of people still feel concerned. So he said, in that case, then, just do the sending of goodness. So another question from the internet, and then we'll take one from the audience here.
So then Tonglen could help deal with feelings of jealousy stemming from attachment issues a practitioner has?
Well, yeah, I can, this is an extremely good point that the person is making. So thank you for that question. Yeah, it does happen like that sometimes, doesn't it? Because in the Lojong manual that Jamgon Khantrul wrote in the 19th century, The Great Path of Awakening, he said that there can be a competition between Dharma people, for favor or for looking good and all of that kind of thing. And he said we have to abandon this. Jamgon Khantrul said this is not Dharma. It may look like Dharma, but it's not Dharma. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, he gave us a technique for this. He said, look, sometimes, if you don't have a lot of money and you can't travel, if you hear somebody's going to India to do pilgrimage, you get jealous because, oh, I don't have the money. I can't go on pilgrimage, or I don't have the money. I can't go on retreat, or I don't have. And he said, why don't you instead think about the people who are doing it and rejoice that they get to do it, and just rejoice in their merit and rejoice in their doing of Dharma. And he says, and the cool thing about it is, he said, you get the same benefit as though you had actually gone on the retreat, or if you had actually gone, you actually benefit from their merit. You benefit from that, and you get the same because you rejoice in the goodness that they did. So anyhow, so yes, rejoicing in the good fortune of others is a very beneficial part of Tonglen and Lojong practice. So thanks for that. Let me see if there's any questions here. Yes.
I was thinking a bit about visual religion.
Yeah.
And during my professional training, is that not everybody visualizes the same.
That's right.
Picture.
Yeah.
Some people see an outline.
Yeah.
Some people visualize more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important for all of us to realize the thought of visualization, not on the picture.
Right. I think that's really good. The person is pointing out that as part of her professional training, she was advised that not everyone thinks in pictures. Some people think in words. Some people see indistinct outlines. Other people see things very vividly. And these are actually, what's the right word? These are variations of normal. These are all variations of normal, because I actually met a person who has a brain condition that prevents them from picturing anything. They have a brain condition. It's very rare, but it happens. They can't see anything. So for them, they would have to use words. They would need to use words in order to convey their feeling. I give all of my happiness to others. So words would be necessary for that person. And one of the Tibetan teachers said, he said, don't make the mistake of thinking that you are only quote unquote good at visualization if you can see things as vividly as you can see them with your eyes. He says it's impossible, because you are using your imagination, which is part of your mental consciousness. And he said, and you will never, ever see things as clearly with your mental consciousness, your imagination, as you see them with your own eyes. So don't expect that of yourself. In other words, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Because if we want everything to be perfect and to meet our expectation, then we're going to make a mistake. Because we need to just be with who we are, where we are, and when we are. And just know that it's a process of learning to train our attitude. So I hope that's helpful.
You visualize it as an outline. You're not doing it wrong.
That's right. If you visualize a mere outline of a person, then you're not doing it wrong. No, of course. Right. You have to do what you have to do, where you have to be where you are. You can't be someplace else, someplace where you're not. And what my teacher told me, he said, look, he said, some of these visualizations are complicated, very complicated. And he said, don't worry if you can't see it. Don't worry if you can't see it. He said, just know that the Buddha or Bodhisattva is there in front of you. Just know that the Buddha is in front of you. If you're praying to the Buddha and you're imagining the Buddha is in front of you and you can't see it, don't worry. Just imagine that he's there. And just interact with the space in front of you as though he is there. And it would be the same with Tonglen, really. Yeah. Anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else here? Okay, one more. Is there one more question from the internet? Okay, that means we are complete. And I want to really thank you again, and thank you especially to this last questioner for pointing out all of the different normal ways of working with your mind, because we do come to meditation wanting to do well. We want to do well. We want to learn it to the best of our ability. But there is so much variation in the minds of people and how those minds work. There's so many variations that what works for one person may not work for another person. And we have to accept the fact that sometimes things work differently for us. And I don't know why it is, but at first I used to judge my meditation a lot for that reason, because I wasn't really good at visualizing, and I'm still not that good. But I did over time build the confidence that that's all there. It's all there and it's all happening. I had a Lama tell me that once. He said, for some of the mantra visualizations, you see lights go out and lights come back, and and lights are going everywhere and doing all kinds of blessings and stuff. He said, it is really complicated. And if you can't deal with it, don't worry, it's happening anyway. And I'm like, wow. It's like, it's happening because you've just described it in the text. And so it's what's happening. And you're just watching it. You're just participating. That's what kind of blew my mind a little bit. And it gave me confidence in the purity of the teachings and the fact that the teachings are powerful regardless of how we grasp them. If we grasp them visually or from the feeling tone, or in whatever way we grasp them and make them ours, we can do that. So anyway, it's just that they get taught this way. They get taught this way through the tradition and the lineage. And so, but we do have to recognize that there's all kinds of variations on how people embrace them, Well, I'm happy to hear that you're interested in doing more with Lojong and Tonglen. I just kind of like tossed this out here this weekend just to see what the interest was. And it looks like there's interest online and there's interest here. So we'll do another class. I can't promise you when it will be because we've got a few irons in the fire, as they say, of possible programming that may happen in April, May, June, and July. So we have a couple of things that are swirling around. We're even thinking of inviting Lama Karma Drodel to come back. And we've heard the possibility that another Lama may be coming to visit us in May. But we don't know if any of that is going to come to pass yet. But I will try to fit a second class in somewhere that you'll hear about it in the newsletter. Well, now in true Bodhisattva tradition, we will dedicate the merit of learning about Tonglen to the accomplishment of Buddhahood by all sentient beings. And we'll do this by reading through the dedication of merit, thinking as we dedicate it that all beings everywhere are free from suffering and come to Buddhahood. And we'll recite it all the way through in English once, and then we'll recite it in Tibetan once, starting with the words by this merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is. Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way. And all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. Okay, I'll recite it in Tibetan now. O sanam dehi tam che zipani Tomne ne pedranam pamjene Ke ganachi palaptrupai Si pe sole droar shom Jampal pavochitar ken padang Kuntu zampo de yante jinte de da kungi jesu ta lochin Ge wadi ta tam che rab tu mo. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so pleased. Thanks again to Jelaine and Don and Sally and all the volunteers who helped today. And we will be seeing you again. And so thanks to all of you at home. Thank you for joining by Zoom. And I wish you all a wonderful day and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lama Kathy.
All right. That's where bring